100 kilometres along the oldest road in Britain. This is my Race to the Stones review. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to The Vegan Runner. This video is a review of Race to the Stones 2022. We'll take a look at the course in detail, the pre-event communication and organisation, the aid stations, the kit list, the atmosphere and the portaloos. Everything race day that you can think of, I'll try to cover in this review. Now I've timestamped everything down below, so if there's a particular section that you're interested in, you can just skip ahead straight to that section right now. Otherwise, sit tight and enjoy the ride. So just to give you a little bit of context, Race to the Stones was my first 100 kilometre ultra race after taking up running, being inspired by ultra runners 5 years ago and gradually working my way towards the goal of running 100 kilometres straight through. Needless to say, this was a pretty big deal for me, and after months of training I was ready to toe that start line and couldn't quite believe what I was about to undertake. For me, it ended up being a 10-hour and 2-minute race. I met loads of great people along the way and had an absolute blast. This will be my final video on Race to the Stones in this series. Now, if you haven't already, you can go back and check out my race day video. And I've also made a video where I've broken down my race day experience, what went well and what didn't, and the lessons that I've learned along the way. So hopefully I can use that and put that into practice for my next ultra. Now I'll leave links to those in the video description below, or check out the Race to the Stones playlist on my channel page where you'll find lots of other Race to the Stones related videos. Okay, so let's get straight into the review, and first up let's talk about the pre-event organisation. So generally speaking, I thought this was really good, with a couple of exceptions that I'll get into in a moment. So first up, signing up to the race is really quick and it's easy. There's nothing new here if you've signed up to races before. You put in all the sort of usual details and the website worked well without any issues, all kind of straightforward and logical. Then once you've signed up, you get access to something called the Participants Information Platform, where you can kind of update your address details should you move, or find out what what wave you're going to be in, and later on, quite close to the race, you can download the event guide, which is really well written and has the answer to just about every question you can think of in it. So when that's published for your race, definitely give it a good look over. Then leading up to the event, you receive pretty regular emails dropping little bits of information about the race, how to train, nutrition guides and sponsors offers, that kind of thing that you might be used to if you've signed up to big races before. Your race bib and some safety pins as well as some baggage labels will arrive in the 2 weeks leading up to the event, and if you have any issues with this, you can go to the information tent just before the race, like on the morning of. I think it was quite close to the start line and you can get it all sorted there. Now, I thought the organisation around the race was really good, and considering how long the route is, the different types of race, because there's day 1 50k, day 2 50k, there's people staying overnight on the course, and there's people just doing either day 1 or day 2 or both, that kind of thing. So considering all that and how many participants there are, I think there's around about 2,000, maybe more, and the range of different sort of backgrounds and the abilities of runners out there, I thought it was really well put together. But I do have a couple of gripes, suggestions. I don't know, let's just get into them. So my biggest complaint with the organisation of the event was the last minute route change, meaning we didn't actually get to race to the stones. Instead, we sort of ran alongside the stones with them about 100 metres in the distance. Now, I almost missed them as we came around the cone, having never been in Avebury before. I'm glad the volunteer at that point just kind of pointed them out and sort of, I think they actually shouted to me, don't forget to look at the stones. Otherwise, I probably just wouldn't have noticed them. Now, on the usual route, which they've had for years, you normally get to run around 2 of the biggest stones in the circle, but with about 3 days to go, we received an email letting us know that they had to change this part of the route. Now, the stone circle is on National Trust land, and with just hours to go before the race, someone must have reminded them that Race to the Stones is going to be passing through soon, and that, I don't know, the National Trust must have got worried about 2,000 pairs of feet running around a couple of the stones. Now, I could understand if we'd had some like heavy rain in the days leading up to the event where that kind of footfall can churn up and kind of damage the ground, but considering the stones are open to literally hundreds of visitors every day, all year round, the ground is grazed already, and it was pretty solid and hard. To be honest, I couldn't really see the issue here, and it was a bit of a disappointment not to get within touching distance of the stones on race day. Now, I think it was out of the organisers. They're called Threshold. I think it was out of their hands. I'm sure they didn't want to make that decision. Yeah, my complaint really is with whoever kicked up a fuss about it just hours before the event. They must surely have known that this event was coming for months and months. Now, I don't really want to make a huge deal out of it, but it did take a little bit of the shine off the day to kind of receive that email. And, you know, stone circles are important to me. It's one of the reasons why I chose this event as my first ultra. So yeah, just take a little bit of the shine off the race for me there. Now, my second slight gripe is going to seem a bit of a strange one coming from a vegan, but Threshold are working really hard on their sustainability front, which is brilliant. And like many race organisers, they're sort of taking steps to reduce their impact on the environment, which is laudable, of course, but it led to a pretty controversial decision to go meat-free about 6 weeks before the race. Now, ultimately, it didn't make a difference to me, and it made me a lot happier to know that meat wouldn't be making much of an appearance out there on the course. After all, the single biggest difference you can make to reduce your carbon footprint and your emissions, and this is why Threshold made this move, is to go plant-based, is to go vegan. So I would like to see Threshold just go that step further and reduce the animal products entirely if sustainability is truly something they care about. Of course, there's a bit of a balancing act for them there. But as I say, the decision to go mostly vegetarian, and there were still meat options available. I think this is just at the base camp and at the end of the race where hot food is cited. But with the meat options, you had to pay extra for them. And that decision ruffled a few feathers, I guess because it was kind of like a last minute change to the sort of overall organisation of the day. I think it just sort of ruffled a few feathers, mostly just because of the timing before the event, and it was a change that came after most had signed up and paid already. Now, obviously, I think it's a good move, and I'd like to see them go that little step further. But I would just say to make these decisions a bit further away from the event and give people plenty of time to get their heads around it. Now, if the shoe had been on the other foot, if they had decided that after I'd signed up and paid for the race that the vegan food options would be sort of behind a paywall, if you like, I would be a little bit miffed too. So, and just as an aside, I don't know whether the catering was done in-house or if it was from an outside company, but let's just say that the food options could have been a better representation of vegan food. The vegetable pasty and chips was great, no complaints there, but the onion bhaji hot dog, which was literally just 3 onion bhajis in a hot dog roll, was something I've never come across before, and probably not a food combination I'll put together again in a hurry. There was a curry there too. I can't quite remember what the flavour of that was. I wasn't up for trying it at the end of the race, but that looked okay, looked absolutely fine. I just think an actual vegan hot dog or some other kind of vegan meat-free option there would have probably been a better advert for meat-free and plant-based food generally. But aside from those two kind of minor points really, I think overall the organisation leading up to the race was definitely up there with some of the big events that I've been a part of, and Threshold are definitely an organisation I can get behind, and I wouldn't hesitate to sign up for another one of their ultra races based on my experience with this race. Okay, now let's talk about the start of the race and what that looked like and how that was organised. Now the start is in this huge farm in a place called Luckner. And drop-off and parking was really well organised, and it was just like pretty hassle-free right up to the start line really. Now as always there were queues for the portaloos, but there was a lot provided so that the queue moved fairly swiftly. Now the start happens in waves. I don't know if they've ever had a mass start before, but this seemed to work out pretty well, and if you're put into a wave depending on your predicted finish time that you put into your kind of details when you sign up for the race. So starting at 6:30. Each wave leaves in 20-minute intervals. It was a pretty cool start. Volunteers manned the first couple of 100 meters with smoke flares, and the atmosphere was good, but it was strangely quiet and subdued. Now, I'm used to kind of marathons, half marathons, where a lot of people together. There are supporters and stuff all over the course cheering, and the start of the race is like this big kind of I don't know, I guess event. It was eerily quiet on that start line. The guy on the PA, the announcer, did his best job to kind of gee everybody up a little bit, but as I say, it was just a very kind of eerily quiet start to a race. And that really continued for at least the first kind of 5 miles or so, where pretty much all along the course for those 5 miles, all you could really hear was just the pitter-patter of people's feet as they were running along. There was very little chatter on the course to start with, and it wasn't until an hour in or so that people kind of, I guess, defrosted, but maybe not the right word, particularly considering I think it was 20 degrees at the start line. But yeah, people kind of, I think those nerves subsided and everybody kind of just loosened up a little bit after a little while. But yeah, definitely the weirdest kind of atmosphere for a start. And again, I don't think there's anything to do with threshold. They had an announcer, he was amusing, they gave us information, they did a warm-up. The start was cool with the smoke flares, but yeah, it was just, I think people were just nervous with the massive undertaking that they had ahead of them. Is that normal for ultras? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd be really interested to find out if that's a typical experience on a start line. But generally, I thought the start was very smoothly run and well organised. One of the easiest and most straightforward starts to a race that I've been involved in. Now, one final thing to just quickly note is that you'll be starting with people who are running the 50k course, so you're all kind of mixed together at the start, so don't be alarmed if people in your wave start a lot faster than you'd expect. It's likely that they're doing the shorter distance that day. Right, okay, and this is probably the most important aspect of this review. Let's talk about the course. Now, spanning approximately 102 kilometres, the course takes you along 63 miles of Britain's oldest road, taking in some of the most beautiful sights of the English countryside, and you're going to be running alongside wheat fields, there's rocky technical sections, there's grass-covered tracks, lazy rivers, shady woodland, chalky trails, postcard perfect rural towns, and perhaps the odd grazing heifer or two. Now, as you'd expect, the range of surfaces varies quite a lot over 63 miles of running, and I'd say the technical rocky sections of the course are pretty well spread out. There's a huge amount of variety both in surface types and scenery along the course. In terms of its kind of natural beauty, I think, anyway, personally, it's a hard course to knock. The fact that thousands of our ancestors would have walked along the very same paths, who knows, maybe even raced along for all we know, for thousands of years before us, it kind of also adds to the mystique and awe of the race. Now, a couple of things to bear in mind about the course. There's a decent stretch of narrow section, particularly in the sort of first 10 to 15 miles. Now, all of them open up and narrow back down quite quickly, but it did make things a little bit trickier to negotiate in terms of pacing and the other competitors near the start of the race. Now, of course, everyone's pacing and running style is slightly different. For me, I love just absolutely flying down hills, and I'm a bit slower than most, I think, anyway, on the climbs. So what would tend to happen on those narrow sections would be for someone to overtake me on the uphill and then for me to kind of pass them again on the downhill. But when it's very tight, there's very little room for overtaking. Now, there's not really much you can do about it. You can just try to stick to your pacing strategy and don't feel kind of pressured to move along faster than is wise, whilst also letting people past if you can get the chance. And, don't worry if you feel a bit held back. The trail is going to open up again fairly quickly, and just remember, you've got a long way to go and you've got a lot of course ahead of you. A few lost seconds will soon be made up elsewhere on the course. Another thing to note about the course, and just something really to bear in mind, is that it's a shared space and it's open to the public. So on a nice day, you can expect all of the sort of typical bridleway traffic from young families to dog walkers, horse riders, cyclists, and at one point I even had a Land Rover driving towards me on a narrow section of the trail. Not sure what they were doing out there, but at 60 kilometers in and nowhere to move, I made sure that the driver knew I wasn't stopping to give way. So just something really to be aware of. Some sections are busier than others, and on a fair amount of the course you'll barely see another soul. Now I had to keep checking the course on my watch just to make sure I was still on the right track, and sometimes it really was that quiet. Now leading up to the race I was part of a couple of support groups on Facebook, and there was a pretty healthy amount of debate on whether it was best to wear road, hybrid or trail shoes for Race to the Stones. I went for trail shoes. I went for the Speedgoat 5 by Hoka and was pretty happy with my choice overall. Particularly on some of the more kind of gnarly technical sections, it was nice to have that extra stability and protection that trail shoes offer. That said, the track was incredibly dry and hard underfoot, and 15% of the trail is on road. So that's about, 10 miles or so in total. Sometimes you're literally just crossing a road to get from one part of the trail to the next, but then there are quite a few long stretches of tarmac to navigate as well. I think the longest is at around mile 20, and it goes on for at least a couple of miles, maybe even 3. So whichever shoes you go for, just make sure that they're comfortable on fairly long stretches of tarmac. If I were to do the race again, I'd happily go with the Speedgoats, but if I forgot them and the course conditions were the same, I wouldn't really panic about running in my road shoes either. Unless the weeks leading up to the race are incredibly wet and the ground's a bit softer, then I would definitely go for trail shoes. But I think in those kind of conditions, and most of the conditions that you're going to come across in sort of early July, ultimately it's going to come down to your personal choice and what you have trained in and what you prefer to run in. Every type of shoe on that course over that distance is going to have its plus sides and downsides. So there you are, no conclusive, you should definitely wear trail shoes, you should definitely wear hybrid or road shoes. It really does just come down to personal choice there, I think. As for hills and elevation, the official GPX route file that Threshold have published says there's about 3,500 feet of elevation. Now my watch recorded 4,500 feet of elevation. I think that's probably the truer figure. There are some decent long climbs. If you have a look at the GPX file, you'll get an idea of where those big ones are. And I think the second half of the race is slightly less undulating than the first. And I think undulating is really the best way of describing the course generally. There's, I think, only one climb that's steep enough that you'd maybe power walk up in a shorter training run, but for the most part, the climbs and descents are gradual with just a smattering of exceptions. Now there are some parts of the course that are quite technical and difficult to run on. One part of the course that sticks in my memory and is somewhere I think around the third quarter of the race, there was a section of track that was almost impossible to run comfortably on. The narrow sort of outer parts of the track sort of sloped inwards, meaning your foot had to kind of land at a really unnatural angle, and then the inside and it was slightly lower part of like the rutted sort of tyre sort of tracks on the track was full of sharp, loose stones that were just as difficult to run on. At that stage of the race, that's pretty tough going, whatever you're wearing on your feet, especially after miles and miles of rolling fields and gently undulating gravel track. Speaking of which, that is something else that you're going to have to get used to now. I enjoy that aspect of the course. It's quite similar to what I've trained on here in Devon, just miles and miles of rolling fields, but I can see that some might find it quite monotonous. And yeah, just a quick thought on that. There are tree-covered areas of the course, but I reckon it covers about, well, it's less than 10%, I think maybe even just 5% of the course in total. So whatever the conditions are, expect plenty of exposure to the elements. There aren't a lot of shaded or covered areas of the course. Speaking of GPX files and navigation, the course is easily one of the best I've been on in terms of its signage. I think it was every 200 meters along the route, there are white arrows on a red background, usually two that are put together and they're just pointing you in the right direction. Just about every time I thought, I haven't seen an arrow for a while, one would almost immediately pop up in front of me. Now, if your watch doesn't have navigation capabilities, I honestly wouldn't stress about it. You won't have a problem going off course, and this is coming from someone who has gone off course in just about every trail race I've ever run. And I didn't on Race to the Stones, so over 63 miles, I think that is not thanks to my navigation capabilities. I already know they're rubbish. That is completely down to Threshold and their excellent signage. So yeah, I really wouldn't worry about going off course. You'd have to really try to get lost in these races. Yeah, so I was really impressed with the signage. I think they said that there were something like 5,000 arrows out there on the course. So that's just incredible. 5,000 or 500? I don't know. Either way, there's a lot, and you're not going to get lost. So I think that pretty much covers the course aspect of this review. If you think of something that I haven't covered, just drop a comment down below and I'll be sure to get back to you. But next up, let's talk about the aid stations. Now overall, I think there are 6, maybe 7 aid stations, or pit stops as the organisers call them. These are all obviously spread out along the route, approximately about every sort of 10 to 15 kilometres. Every single one was well stocked with just about everything you'll ever need, and all of them were manned by very friendly staff and volunteers. In the latter pit stops, I think around 6 and 7, the volunteers were just really awesome and helpful and offered to get my bottles filled up and asked me what else I needed and wanted and if there was anything they could do. There was plenty of everything there, so as long as you get on with the event sponsors' nutrition products, and in this case it was High Five, I don't really see any reason to carry your own gels and snacks unless, of course, you really want to, or you have special dietary needs. In terms of being vegan, there was plenty there for us, and I knew what I'd be picking up at the aid stations before race day, which made it a lot easier, but it was good to see at some of the aid stations volunteers were pointing out the foods that were vegan. Also, I'm pretty sure every aid station had at least a few portaloos should you need to use them. A couple of gripes about the aid stations, and mostly it's to do with their position on the course. So first up, pit stop 2, which is at around, I think, the half marathon mark. If you want to stop at this one, you have to go off course and then take I think it's around about a 1/4 of a mile detour. If you're not going to the aid station, you can just carry on along the ridgeway straight in front of you. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it isn't huge, but just a suggestion to Threshold, if it's possible, I think you should route the course up to the aid station and have a turnaround point for those that aren't going to use it. As I say, it's not a massive thing, generally speaking, in an ultra. Most finishers are well spread out, but I think it's only fair that everyone should run the same course, regardless if you're using an aid station or not. Now, the second gripe about an aid station is aid station 5. I think it's at around about 60 kilometres, and it's probably out of the organiser's control, but you have to go down this grassy farmland track. It's about a 1/4 of a mile to the aid station, and the grass was like so overgrown you couldn't see where you were putting your feet for most of it. One side was slightly better than the other, and because you come up the same track leaving the aid station as you do when you're running to it, you meet onward traffic, and well, I won't name names, but I was certain one competitor was going to run through me unless I moved from, the left side of the track as I was heading down into the aid station, and then had to sort of move out of their way. They certainly weren't going to give them the easier path. So my suggestion to Threshold would be to make sure that this track is as clear as possible before race day, and if possible, have it a bit more closely mown. It's a really small gripe in the grand scheme of things, but I think it was probably my least favourite part of the whole course. Moans and groans aside, the aid stations themselves were awesome and well stocked with friendly volunteers. They were almost perfect, they just need a little bit of tweaking with the position of a couple of them. Now, the end of the race was pretty cool too. So after you've made it to the stones at around 98 kilometres, the last section of course takes you back the way you've just come, then up one final field before you make a sharp left turn, and then you run a very straight section of farmland track, and you can see these colourful flags in the distance almost like on the horizon, and as you get a bit closer you can hear the PA system and the supporters getting louder and louder until you cross the line and get your medal. Again, the finish was really well manned with volunteers and staff who were really helpful and supportive, and would have pretty much, helped you with anything that you needed at that point. So yeah, so a really lovely place to finish. I wouldn't really change anything about that. I think I was just happy to get across the line, to be honest. But to see it in the distance, to know that you're heading towards the finish, was a good kind of motivator to throw down as quick as you can for the last kind of few hundred meters of the race. So overall then, you really can't go wrong with Race to the Stones. If you're thinking about taking this on as your first ultra, absolutely go for it. It's really well organised. The route, in my opinion, is spectacular, and you're going to have an absolute blast. The organisation of the race is pretty much near perfect. It's quite an achievement really when you consider all of the different kind of factors and everything that they've got to organise across those 2 days. And I wouldn't hesitate to sign up for it again if there weren't so many other amazing ultras out there that I want to complete. If I had to give it a score, it would be a 9 out of 10 for me. It was almost everything was perfect, just a couple of little tweaks here and there to get that 10 out of 10 score. Now, a huge thanks to the Threshold team for putting on such a great event. Thanks to all of you for your support along this entire journey. Thanks for watching, and until the next one, be the best you.